Hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Christina Patterson and leader writer at the Daily Telegraph, Tim Stanley. There they are. So let's have a look at what's on those front pages. The Sunday Express has a plea to the PM from the travel industry to slash the cost of COVID tests in an effort to kickstart the sector's recovery. Universities refuse to stop online teaching despite having the go-ahead to return to fully face-to-face lessons. That's on the front of the Sunday Times. The world will soon face catastrophe from climate breakdown if urgent action is not taken, warns the UK minister in charge of the upcoming COP26 talks, Alok Sharma. Boris Johnson's green agenda is plunged into chaos, with fears working-class families will be the most affected. Sorry, but Geronimo has to die. Cabinet Minister George Eustice defends the decision to put down the alpaca with TB. That's an exclusive in the Mail on Sunday. On the front of the FT, the fierce battle for the supermarket chain Morrison's continues as potential buyers raise the stakes. The Mirror features Dominic Raab on its front page and his alleged movements following a trip to the Amber Plus France. And the Daily Star has the latest developments in the TV show Love Island. And we are joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Tim Stanley. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. Let's kick off with the Sunday Times. Tonto PM threatened to demote Sunak. Christina, what's all this about?
Well, yet again, the Prime Minister shows his true colours. He's obsessed with the polls, in particular with internal polling, and in particular with the recent Conservative Home poll, which cements the view that Rishi Sunak is by far the most popular politician in the cabinet, and that Boris Johnson's popularity ratings have plunged. And this appears to have upset Boris Johnson a lot. We know he doesn't like competition, and Rishi Sunak leaked, or somebody leaked, the fact that Rishi Sunak was writing a letter to Boris Johnson to urge loosening the restrictions on travel, which, it has to be said, have been a complete and utter mess. And this apparently enraged Boris Johnson so much that in a meeting on Monday morning, he essentially said he threatened to demote him and said he might make him health minister. And apparently there were about 10 people present, and it was not said in jest. So if I were Rishi Sunak, I wouldn't be that worried, because I would know that I was considerably more popular than the Prime Minister. But again, it shows that Boris Johnson is not a nice man and is not loyal to his colleagues.
OK, Tim, what do you think? How much truth do you think there is to this?
Well, I don't know, because what we're getting right now is one account. I can understand why the Prime Minister might be frustrated that he didn't receive what was apparently a very important piece of communication. Maybe he was speaking more in jest than he was speaking literally. But I think if you step back from this, what's going on here is that chancellors and prime ministers have very different tasks. The Prime Minister has to think of everything. The chancellor primarily has to think of one thing, which is the economy. And what Rishi Sunak's been thinking about is, first of all, the impact of restrictions upon the economic recovery post-COVID. He's also thinking about the long-term costs of the various plans that the Prime Minister and the Tory party have signed up to. And putting those two things together, you have an economy which is not in the greatest shape. You have receipts are bound to be down. You have a vast amount of spending, a lot of outlay that Britain's gone through in the last 18 months because of furlough. And on top of that, the government has a long list of things it was committed to before the pandemic and after the pandemic, including the environment and social care reform. Now, right now, Rishi Sunak, yes, is very popular. And he's very popular because he was the Chancellor during furlough, and because many people feel that it was his generosity and his management that got the country economically through the crash. Plus, the economy seems to be rebounding, which also works in his favour too. But I would be wary of any polls right now that say the Chancellor's more popular than the Prime Minister, because the Chancellor is going to have to start actually making firm commitments on spending and on tax. And we may well be looking forward to tax rises. So if I was the Prime Minister, I wouldn't be too worried about my job right now, because in a few months' time, Rishi Sunak could be quite unpopular.
Interesting. You mentioned the environment. Let's pick up on that, because the front of the Sunday Telegraph about the PM's net zero target. And so many people have said, well, how are we actually going to achieve this target? The Sunday Telegraph saying that his push has been plunged into chaos. Why, Christina?
Well, because there are certain areas where having your cake and eating it doesn't work terribly well. And one of them is during a pandemic. And another is when you're dealing with what is clearly an incredibly serious climate crisis. We now have the evidence very sort of horribly in front of us in the form of wildfires raging through Greece and many parts of the world at the moment, southern Europe and so on. So Boris Johnson wants to look green. He's hosting the COP21, 22, whatever it is.
26.
26.
Yeah, there've been many.
So it can't be that. And he wants to look, like a global leader strutting around the world stage as if he's, the pioneer and leader of all this. But that's not actually going to work out very well, not least because we are still pushing fossil fuels in all kinds of ways, but also because it's going to be extremely expensive. And Boris Johnson needs to keep the so-called red wall seats on side. And of course, those are among the groups that are going to be hardest hit by having to change your way of life very considerably and getting rid of your boiler and getting rid of your car and insulating your house and all these things which are very expensive. And there is no cheap way to get to green energy, and there is no cheap way to get to zero carbon. So I can see why the Tories are panicking about this. You can't reach that target in a kind of pain-free way. I know that Boris Johnson doesn't like pain, he doesn't like inflicting pain, and he doesn't like to be unpopular, but there are very unpopular decisions that are going to have to be made on this.
Tim, what do you make? Because we've got Alok Sharma internationally, everyone's saying COP26, we have to have concrete action coming out of COP26. The Observer saying we're on the brink of catastrophe, warns Tory climate chief. But as Christina was saying there, we've had no form of action from within simply because it is so unpopular, because it's so expensive to do.
The government would say that it has taken action in terms of setting targets and passing laws. But of course, you then actually have to pay, you have to actually then spend money either to change people's consumer habits, which means that you or I have to spend money to replace the boiler or replace the car with an electric version. And then secondly, you have to spend money on infrastructure so that these things will work. The classic example is electric cars. Not only do we have to switch to electric cars as consumers, but there also have to be points available everywhere so that people can charge their car. It's not good enough just to pass a law saying by this date, everyone must be electric. If we don't have the infrastructure for everyone to go electric. So that's the problem. The government would say it is taking a lead, and it is taking a lead globally. It is setting very, very ambitious targets for itself. What it's not doing right now is leveling with consumers about how much it will cost and actually detailing in a convincing way what it will spend to make it happen. The government has committed 12 billion thus far to the development of green infrastructure. You're probably looking at a final, more realistic figure of several times that each year to meet the government's own targets. So that's the problem. And again, to take it back to what we were discussing earlier, where does the money come from this? Well, that's where the Treasury comes in. And as far as Rishi Sunak is concerned, he's got to find money for social care, he's got to find money for the costs of the COVID recovery, for levelling up, all these sorts of things. And on top of that, we are imposing this green revolution, which I think most people watching thinks needs to be done. Decarbonisation is the future. These green technologies can, in the long run, not only be cleaner, but even cheaper. You just look at the way in which the price of solar is going down so dramatically. So we mustn't regard this necessarily as a bad thing. But in the short run, it's an expensive thing, and the Tories have got to level with people about that.
Christina, it comes on the eve of this IPCC, which is an intergovernmental panel on climate change. They're publishing this report tomorrow, and they're going to say we're on the edge of complete disaster. What is Alok Sharma saying about it?
Well, when he's not flying around the world, and I think he's flown to 30 countries, somehow amazingly, miraculously bypassing all of the travel restrictions that have been incumbent upon everybody else, when he's not flying around the world emitting carbon dioxide, then he is apparently very worried about it all. And he is absolutely right to be worried about it all. I mean, I have to say that at the moment, if you look at the fires and if you look at the rising temperatures and the reports that are emerging all the time about changing climate, even in the UK, it is incredibly worrying. I think there have been plenty of climate deniers in the past, and there are still some, but it's really, really hard to look at the evidence, even to look at the weather on a daily basis and not see that something real is happening here. So I think that what has changed a lot in the last 2 years or so, maybe 2 or 3 years, and not just because of Greta Thunberg, is that argument is no longer raging the same way. We do know that climate change is real. The question is what you do about it, and it is an emergency.
OK, let's talk about universities. What's the Sunday Times saying about universities refusing to end online lessons, Tim?
This is astonishing. Other aspects of the economy have totally opened up. Some universities are going to stick to delivering some teaching and lectures online rather than in person. What I love is that I think it's Oxford. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's Oxford described the use of online learning as enhancing the learning experience. And another college talks about a blend of online and face-to-face teaching. This is simply not good enough. And the reason why it's not good enough is because people now pay for their tuition, and they pay an awful lot. And for that, they have every right to expect to be taught face-to-face. Otherwise, what is the point of paying that amount of money if you're relying upon lectures or tuitions which are done by someone far away, pre-recorded, given to lots of other people, etc., etc.? In the long run, I wonder if there's a case for a radical rethink of the way in which we deliver higher education in this country. If perhaps we should move more towards online, but the consequence of that should be that people don't pay as much for it. There's nothing wrong with a kind of lifelong learning system where people can dip in and out and study at different points in their life, and online would seem to lend itself to that much better. But right now, expecting half of all kids to go to university and pay vast sums of money in order to have a lecture on the computer when regular kids are back in school in the classroom for free, that's frankly outrageous.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we are in now a situation where some uni students have only ever had an online uni experience. Let's start with the Mail. Christina, this has been going on for 4 years, hasn't it? Tell us about this alpaca called Geronimo.
Well, yes, poor Geronimo has, in the age when we're all tested all the time, Geronimo has had 2 positive TB tests, and they are apparently extremely reliable. The margin for error is almost non-existent. His owner, Helen MacDonald, claims that the tests are wrong and that Geronimo doesn't have TB. And understandably, she is desperate. She's very fond of him and she's desperate to keep him alive. The government says he does have TB and he is a threat because bovine TB can spread, obviously, to other animals. And speaking as someone whose neighbour in Northamptonshire has had to see during the foot and mouth crisis, had to burn huge piles of beloved animals, I have to say that I think in these situations, you do have to follow what the science says. And if the science says that an animal is at serious risk of spreading harm and disease, then I'm afraid, tragically for Helen MacDonald and tragically for Geronimo, he probably does have to be put down, but obviously terrible for her and terrible for him.
It really pulls at the heartstrings, doesn't it, Tim? Because if it was a cow, he would have been put down straight away. But her argument is that the tests are not for alpacas.
I don't know much about the science of the test, but I will say Geronimo is a very handsome alpaca. He's certainly a looker. he's very good looking. I don't see why he can't be moved to some little island or something where there's no risk of him infecting anyone else.
I think he's got his own little island on the farm. He's in quarantine.
Well, there you go. I'm sorry. I'd feel very differently if Geronimo were mine. I'd go on the run with him. I would.
Don't go on the run with him, because then if he has got TB, he'll be spreading it around the country.
Right. I know, but I can entirely understand why she doesn't want poor Geronimo to be put down. There must be another way. Can we not have a special place for animals like that where they've all got it and they just cough over each other and just do any harm? I don't really understand it, but I don't want this poor creature to die.
Yeah,
and
no.
I feel very sad for poor Geronimo.
Yeah, I think we all do. I've seen in another paper that she says she's going to film what she calls his execution.
Oh, how dreadful.
Yes,
Right.
I think it is quite dreadful indeed. But also TB, I think, hides very well in the human body and then in the body of any animal and then reappears. So let's leave it there on that sad news about Geronimo and hope he can find a reprieve.